Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dynasty Underdog. I'm your host, Ray Hawkins. I lost track of the number of episodes a long time ago. But with me tonight, Billy Beeman and Jake Corbin. What's going on, guys?
I'll be honest, I've just been winging it lately when I add the episodes, and I'm like, is it 225, 226, 220? I'm just like, I'm putting a number and hoping I'm right lately. So episode number doesn't matter, but I'm telling you, I'm reeling right now from a bunch of finals losses, and I'm
Really?
potentially taking another one tonight in DU3. But I need a massive Monday Night Miracle from Jahmyr Gibbs, so praying for that as we get through this podcast and try to get through it quickly enough so I can, I guess, watch my own demise.
The right way to do it.
Yeah, you got more backbone than me. Like, that's the type of shit that, like,
Oh, you froze.
Oh, did we lose Uriah?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, there's that. We can get going, I guess.
Sure.
Until Uriah gets back. And I guess it's appropriate that. Well, how are you doing, Jake? Did you even jump in yet? I feel like. I didn't
no.
hear your voice yet.
How
are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I lost both of my Dynasty finals, but I did win 2 redraft finals, one of which is a first ever win in a co-managing situation. I've been doing a league for 25 plus years with my dad, so that was super sick to win that. And
it's incredible,
dude. The joy in his voice and my voice this morning when I told him was just, I don't know, it was top notch. It's why you play. It's why you co-manage too. Like, I don't definitely recommend it for everybody. It's not the best, but when you do finally win together, it is something else, man. It really is. It's crazy. So yeah, that was exciting.
I'm sure there's difficult and challenging parts of it being like father-son managing a team together, but there's also benefits of like you guys being pretty close and able to, and after 25 years of working together, you kind of know what you're trying to do for the most part. And so it kind of culminates in a championship win, which is really cool for you guys. And it's funny, I've known you guys for probably that long at least. And I feel like you've been in the league since I can remember playing in this fantasy league. I remember you guys drafting your team together when I was really young. So it's just super cool, like full circle moment, I feel like, for you, and just like for me looking in, it's dope that you guys won that. So
thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Uriah, thank you for joining us again. How you doing?
Back?
You're back.
Yeah.
We'll see for how long.
Yeah, we'll see. I had to switch to a different internet thing. Whatever. I'm here.
All right.
Let's hop into it. So some news and nonsense. Damn. All right, so Flaccid Penix. So Michael Penix Jr., he had a start the last 2 weeks. He's not exactly lighting it up, and are you guys worried?
Not too much. I mean, I feel like when I've watched the games, he's actually looked pretty sharp for the most part, and he did, lead them back, into a tie game there. And so, I guess when it mattered, he kind of showed up. But what it looks like to me is the game is just pretty fast for him, and it's his first time in the NFL. That's kind of what it looks like. But he, for a rookie who's just been thrown in there, he kind of looks fairly sharp, in my opinion. I don't know. What'd you see, Jake?
Yeah, no, I saw the same thing. Honestly, I wouldn't. This is one of the hardest times of the year to really come into playing your first real minutes of professional football, and for the Atlanta Falcons to do that to him, I feel like was kind of the wrong move from like a general stress test perspective. But I think from all of my own like physical measures, I think he's done everything that I've asked of him or would want him to have done. So I think from a performance perspective, I've been pretty happy as someone who has a few shares of Michael, and it's definitely, I think, a pretty positive trajectory to see over the last 2 weeks. Against the Giants, he looked borderline perfect outside of the Kyle Pitts fumble that was truly an interception to
trash.
Yeah, literally to Penix. And then this week he had I think only 1 interception as well. And that was just like a really interesting play where it looked like the wide receiver was supposed to run a corner route, and he ended up just kind of running a curl. And it was just, that was really it. Most of his mistakes didn't really seem that jarring to me. So I thought all in all, he looked pretty good.
Jake has a direct line to Penix, calling him Michael. He said he's done everything he's asked of him.
I just don't want to say
wow,
his. I don't want to say his last name, dude.
It's,
I don't know.
It's just too close, right? It's
calling
just
him Mike.
Yeah,
Michael P.
Michael P. Michael P. Oh my goodness, yeah. Yeah, all right, yeah. That's. I mean, I think it's a good breakdown of it. Did you see anything? You're right.
Just looking at his, catchable pass rate, his on target rate, touchdown interception rate, yeah, all those things, like things outside of competition, just like he's putting the ball where it's supposed to be most of the time already. So that's pretty good. People up here in Seattle are pretty happy about it. All right. Regarding Deebo Samuel, already had the bounce back. That's great. I'm glad he bounced back after I got booted from the playoffs. What do you guys think about Deebo?
I mean, this was more a conversation that Jake and I had, I think, when you were either left the pod or whatever it was. And it was just more about acquiring Deebo. It was really about like the price of Deebo that we were kind of debating. And this was kind of my point, is like, this is how fast the production value bounces back for a guy like Deebo, like 22, 25 points, whatever it was, a week after 5-week stretch of like under 10 points. But I just think that if he has like a decent finish to the season here, you're going to head into the offseason with more value than, I purchased him for, or at least the same value where you can get off of him. And so I just think that he's one of those players that can easily bounce back in value. And that was kind of my point. And I think it already happened, or at least an example of it happening pretty quickly after we had the conversation. So that was just kind of my point and why I wanted to bring it back up, not to like throw it in your face or anything like that. Cause like it's unlikely that I'm going to get the value back for him today or anything like that based on that performance. But I think that he has it in him still. And I think that he's still, we also had a debate or a disagreement on the quality of player he is too. So that's not going to go away. But anyway, just wanted to bring that back up because I thought his value probably got boosted a little bit already by that performance. Yeah,
if you had recently traded for him, you're probably feeling pretty good right now that like he didn't continue to suck, right? So, and I don't think he will. I think the Deebo that we've seen in the last couple of weeks is closer to the Deebo that he's going to be moving forward. But we shall see. All right, here another one. Kind of a miss on my part, and that's fine with me. Like I just like to see guys succeed. But Xavier Worthy, 9 or more targets in the final 3 fantasy matchups. Is he figuring things out, or is it just a solid stretch?
I kind of want to hear Jake's thoughts on this one. Or Uriah, please go in if you have some thoughts.
Let's have Jake have this one.
Oh, okay, cool. Because I couldn't defend myself regarding Deebo Samuel, so I'll defend myself.
Go ahead.
I'm totally
He's biting his lip. I saw him.
I'm totally fucking with you. I was cracking up because I was like, when I saw this on the sheet, the Deebo Samuel item, I knew exactly where you were going with it, and I was just like, all right, it's all good. But yeah, I think
you're gonna take it on the chin. I like it.
Yeah. I was wrong. I still think he sucks. But Xavier Worthy, I do think that this is kind of reminiscent of what we saw out of Rashee Rice last year with regards to just general usage ramp up throughout the season. Obviously, Rashee Rice had truly not a lot to compete with last season. And I would say that was not really the same for Xavier Worthy. He had like a bunch of weird little windows where you could see his usage would potentially get hindered because of the DeAndre Hopkins trade, the then now Hollywood Brown kind of reinstitutionalized usage from injury, Juju Smith-Schuster signing as a free agent, like little pieces within the season that you could say to yourself, okay, maybe there's a reason why Xavier Worthy isn't kind of coming into his own. But I really do think that we saw from almost week 1 kind of the general Andy Reid, without saying like his standard modus operandi in a way. Like he uses these types of players in very specific ways. And I almost want to say that we got a glimpse of what he wanted to do with Xavier Worthy from the onset, but he never felt confident enough in him until I would say the last 3 to 4 weeks to really start implementing that within the offense. I think as a whole, I still am not truly in love with Worthy in terms of his general route usage, but I think from a fantasy scoring perspective, this does seem significantly more appealing. And I think as someone who has 2 or 3 shares, this is a really great way to go into the offseason, truth be told, because we talk about this all the time. But I think non-point scoring season, especially playoffs for NFL teams, is one of the best times for players to really start ramping up for us, because I think there's new interpretations of how players will be used in the following season that I don't necessarily think end up landing on their feet. So that's kind of where I'm at. What about you, Uriah?
Oh, yeah, same thing. I think, obviously, I still had a big crush on Sky Moore, and we're trying to go through the history of Andy Reid and his rookie wide receivers. And believe it or not, every single one of them starts off very slow. That's just how he's done it his entire career. Not a single one is just like shut off. So I think there's some trust issues there, and I think it's probably smarter with the rookie, right? Yeah, I love what I've seen from him the last few weeks. They're using him in a way that's really helpful for him and his skill set. I don't think he's going to get 9 or more targets every game moving forward or anything like that. But I do think that he kind of carved out a role on this offense that's unique to him and him alone. So, I mean, wheels up, kind of a miss on my part, but so far he's dealing.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe, I think, how the usage has gone. I mean, I think it's interesting. They get Hollywood back and things start to change a little bit. And I'm wondering if they're allowing Hollywood to do a little bit more of the down the field work, and they're allowing Worthy to be a little bit more versatile, right? And deploy him in different ways. And you see that a little bit more short area targets than he was typically getting before, screens, those kind of things, as well as some other middle of the field, second level stuff. It's a little bit more versatile now. And I'm thinking when they get Rashee Rice back, because they're not going to have Hollywood, they get Rashee Rice back next year, they might have a little bit of a similar construction, and you might see some of the same. And I agree with you, right? It's not going to be, 9, 10, 11 targets every game, but it does seem like they're more comfortable with it. So I do think that this is going to become a more consistent player. I don't know if it's going to be this consistent, but more consistent. So I like what we're seeing from him. As we saw earlier in the season, I think the biggest issues for us were the fundamentals, the fine tuning of like the sideline awareness, like those little things. And it's still not fully there. So I think, once he gets a full off season to work on these, the nuances, I think he might really turn it on in year 2. So an exciting player. We weren't all in on him at all in this podcast, but he looks like he's definitely going to be a productive fantasy player.
Cool. All right. This one is solely for you guys because I don't have any. Championship teams. Are there any trends or strategic positioning that got you here?
Jake,
yeah,
Either
sure.
of you guys in the finals,
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I took away from this season, especially for teams that got into the final or near the final or won a final, was really down to kind of 2 things. One was within startups, kind of my general approach to how I want to tackle a team. I think Billy will actually talk a little bit about this too. So I think his strategy is actually even more fine-tuned than my own, and maybe be more beneficial for him to talk about his. But the other thing I would say is to not really, I guess, rush needs throughout the season, because I think that there is going to be even more windows as you get closer to playoffs, and not to talk about no trade deadline versus trade deadline leagues. But I do think that in non-trade deadline leagues, you do get those additional weeks to really kind of revamp parts of your team for relatively cheaper pieces. I do think that there are a plethora of options out there that are really, really affordable and can find your way into kind of ways to better tune your team for a competitive purpose week in, week out. What about you, Billy?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, I think you brought up a point about being kind of patient and really calculated with the moves. You may have said it a different way, but I think that was definitely something I found that was maybe a byproduct of just my life, right? But it was something that kind of worked out for the most part, where I made fewer moves. The ones I made seemed a little bit more consequential and worthwhile. And where I didn't, I was able to just kind of, get by. Though I did make, quite a few moves in some of the DU leagues. It's not like I didn't make any moves this season, but there were a couple of leagues that, I got to the finish line that I didn't make a ton of moves. But what I did notice trend wise, especially as, some of the teams that I drafted this year, was I stored a lot of value, like I usually do, in high-end wide receiver production, which carried me through the season, even though there were some injuries. But that's just like a tale as old as time. Like, you can really store tons of dynasty value and production in these wide receivers, and that allows you to not have to make a ton of moves because, going forward, these guys are probably going to be there for you, right? Whereas, you get these older players in different positions like running back, tight end, and you kind of got to make moves here and there. But to that point, what I was also able to do was build quite a few teams that had, bully tight end builds, I guess, or organizational structures to my teams, where I was going for, the George Kittles, which I leaned into a lot this offseason, where he was super valuable. Ended up being a top 5, wide receiver. The Mark Andrews, I went out and got Travis Kelce here and there for a second round pick or such. Those kind of things, trying to build around guys other than Travis Kelce, obviously, but who I think will still carry some value into the future, but also are going to allow me to create an advantage for myself amongst the league. And so I felt like, when I say store a lot of value in wide receivers, that's also kind of saying that I did the 0 running back approach, which worked out because, again, I think we were able to find some valuable running backs either late in our drafts or late in the season to acquire for pretty cheap, a la James Conner, even though the injury kind of screwed that for us. But I still think we can call that out as a viable strategy and a win there. So that's kind of I think the trends that I saw with the teams that made it to the finals for me.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll build off of that I have liked with a lot of the teams that I've had compete later on down the road is that most of the value is still insulated in relatively younger assets. So I'm not really finding my teams to be built in a way that I need to like cash out immediately, or I feel like they're too long in the tooth. So I do find that when you do go this path, you're only really seeing like 1 to 2 assets in a given year kind of teeter off where they still have viable usage. So it's like someone like a James Conner or an Alvin Kamara are the ones that are typically on the age bubble for me, with maybe like a George Kittle or a Travis Kelce on like the older ends of the roster, and Evan Ingram, things like that. And that's okay with me. Like I'm fine with that as long as I have, 2 of the top 4 wide receivers. I typically find myself really well mixed with that, plus a top 5 quarterback, and then usually like a top 15 quarterback is usually how a lot of those builds kind of look for me, and have found themselves to be relatively productive. Now, I will say that the other thing that I've noticed is being able to properly roster typically like a quarterback 3 and 4 in the same range of points, just in case your QB 1 or 2 goes down, really does help kind of elongate value. Now, with that being said, this isn't for me, but I have seen it in other leagues where guys like Mason Rudolph, Drew Lock, there was one more, Mac Jones. Those were definitely viable late season quarterback use options for people, and they actually ended up getting them into finals and winning in certain leagues that I'm in. So like, it's not for me, but I do think that there is something to the game of having those guys on your roster early on in the season, right? Like those were guys that I was typically trying to roster for almost nothing in the off season, sending like a late 4th or something like that, and hoping to get maybe a 2nd or even an early 3rd come playoffs for those types of pieces if I could. So that's just something else that I had noticed.
Yeah. And in Deep Dynasty, I mean, we talk a lot about how the QB3s, like the back end QBs, don't offer, an advantage point scoring wise, but in our Deep Dynasty leagues, where, you know, everything is rostered, these guys can't come in handy. Absolutely. So, yeah, that's a fair point. And we've talked a lot about rostering those beforehand, so you have those options on your bench when they do, you know, when it does come to fruition type thing. AJ, zero or hero running back is the way. Hero running back is definitely the way. Zero is much more taxing, and it requires a lot of effort and attention throughout the season. I'd like to do a hero build if possible. You said, do older wide receivers retain value for you as well? Honestly, like if I look at most of my teams, I would say a lot of the wide receiver value is stored in like the more young to middle age, like the 22 to 26 range, you know? And like once you get to like the 28, 29, you know, you're talking about the Godwins and the Tyreek Hills, like those kind of receivers, you know, the community starts to sour on them a little bit just from an age perspective. So I think just their inherent dynasty value takes a little bit of a hit. Tyreek type when a little bit older, Godwin a little bit younger because doesn't have that high of a pedigree. So I think, you know, you just kind of you see it happen that way. So I do try to get those like the Drake Londons. Obviously, I want to get as many Jamar Chases, CD Lambs, Justin Jeffersons, like those guys, of course. But then, you know, you're talking about the Amon-Ra's, the Drake Londons, like those kind of players. Even in the DJ Moore range, I think those tend to hold value really well throughout the career, like those kind of players in general. I'm thinking about.
Sound like an old head, leaving out two of the younger wide receivers who've absolutely killed it this year in Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr.
Yes,
but
those two. Yes, 100%. I agree.
Yeah, this guy only loves vets. Got it.
I am an old head for sure.
It was a hell of a year for rookies, man.
It was. Especially the wide receivers, incredible. But also, the quarterbacks, and had a great tight end season. Yeah, it was an incredible rookie season. Rookie class, I should say.
Yep. All right. Underdog under review. What could we have done better this season?
I mean, I got some stuff, but
I'll go first.
Yeah, go. Anybody?
Nothing. I did everything perfect. It was easy.
I'll tip my hat to you.
I tanked perfectly.
Yes. So, I mean, I made the playoffs in every league I intended to make the playoffs. So that's successful, right? At some point. And then every league I was tanking in, I walked away with either the 101 or the 102. Those are all things that, like, okay, that's good. You did your thing. You're not stuck in the middle. But I'm looking at, I think it's League of Legends. I got the 101, but I don't have any extra first round picks. Like, maybe I have one, or I have a couple extra seconds or something, but I don't have. And I knew I was tanking in that league, like, after week 4 or 5. I have plenty of pieces on my team where I should be walking away with a whole lot more picks than I have right now. So I successfully tanked, and I got the trophy of the 101, but I don't have a whole lot to go along with it other than my own picks. And I view that as a failure. I feel like even though you successfully got where you wanted to get, you didn't get the other stuff along the way. And I'm going to be kicking myself for that because now I don't have a chance to get those picks. Like, I mean, I can, right? I mean, I could still trade, but it's a lot harder when folks aren't trying to get points anymore, right? So I do look at that as a failure. I wish I could have done better on that. And I was trying to think about my teams that went into the playoffs and what I could have done differently, but in at least 2 of them, I didn't have a whole lot of future stuff because I did last year try to further my way into a championship, get myself further in the playoffs. So, like, I don't have my future first anymore. I already spent that last year. And I wasn't going to go reach into my 2026 bag and end up doing that again and just completely fucking myself. So I was looking at, and I got some really high end, like, quarterback prospects and tight ends. And I think my biggest problem there was I didn't look to kind of tier down in dynasty value for production. Was really lazy there. I think I could have gone farther in at least like DU3, possibly DU4, and even DU1 if I had just worked a little bit harder at acquiring points without thinking like I can't get these players without sending picks. You absolutely can get players that you need for your team without sending picks if you do it right. I just kind of got a little gun shy about, well, I'm here. all it takes is get here and anything could happen. But if I was trying to be really real with myself, I wasn't a top 2 or top 3 team in any of those leagues. I was top 5, top 6, right? But it just wasn't enough, and I didn't do enough to help my team out there. I'm proud of myself for not reaching into future pick bags, walking away with the picks that I had entering this season. Other than that, it's like I said, it's an oblong ball and things happen. When Cooper Kupp shits the bed the same week as Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor or whatever, it is what it is. You just got to take your L and walk away. But I'm actually kind of proud of what I did this year, although I'm just donating to all you guys. But I'm happy that with the leagues that I managed, I did kind of what I wanted to do. I just think I could have done a lot more with the teams that made it to the dance to give them a better shot to go further.
Dude, such a good answer.
Yeah, I was gonna say that
such
was
a good
amazing.
answer.
You prepped for that, dude. That was amazing stream of consciousness.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No,
great.
it was really good. I think, just the idea of like accomplishing what you were trying to, but not doing as much as you could is a great realization. I think, just a great self-reflection heading into the following season. I think that'll help you a lot. Like that was great stuff. Jake, I'll let you jump in and then I'll go.
Yeah, I'll take it on from like the more like mental health side. I think like one of the best things one of the things that I could have done better realistically would have been to kind of take my hand off of individual performances. I find that when I'm watching individual performances from players that I just don't really like, I almost find a way to remove myself from wanting to either roster them or move forward with them. I think a prime example of that would be Bryce Young. I was actually pretty into Bryce Young going into the season. And so when he got benched after week 2 or 3, I really wanted to buy in. But for some reason, that last performance before he got benched, I watched his all 22 tape, and honestly, it was atrocious. Like there was a reason why he got benched, and I really sold myself off of him, knowing that there was a perfect buy window to go out and grab him. Now, I don't know if he necessarily will hit the heights that he has to necessarily like even out to that 101 NFL draft capital, but there's still something there that is really, really attractive, I think, in a general Superflex Dynasty asset at quarterback, and enough to be able to acquire, especially when he got benched, right? So that would be a really good example for me. Another one that came out of mine was Saquon Barkley, actually. With regards to just his general usage within the Giants organization, and not, I guess, trying to kind of look at how teams would potentially use him in the offseason, I was starting to get skeptical of how specifically Philly would, right? Because the narrative would be, Jalen Hurts is going to steal touchdowns from him, which he did, but to what extent? And how their team would be so significantly more run heavy, I don't think was anything I was able to predict, but was something that I found myself seeing in my inbox was a pretty common trend of me devaluing Saquon Barkley offers in the offseason. So there's a couple that I can think of, but one of them was I had Tyreek Hill. I could send Tyreek for Saquon plus TJ Hawkinson. Now, any way, shape, or form you look back at that and you're like, oh, well, you obviously like that's a smash, you have to accept it. But I think one of my biggest issues that I had when I was really evaluating that trade specifically was truly trying to understand what I'm trying to get out of Tyreek Hill at his stage in his career, and also like how does that differentiate from Saquon Barkley, considering how successful he was even in New York. Then to add on top a TJ Hawkinson is just absolutely nuts, right? So it just makes me wonder how I can improve upon situations like that, even if it's not just an isolated deal, but multiple deals, and knowing that there's a domino effect. And it's funny to see this comment and show that I'm risk averse, because I think the funny thing is that I tend to not be risk averse at all. Usually in Dynasty, like I find myself to really shoot my load on things that I believe in. And funny enough, sorry, I thought we make a lot of ejaculate comments on this on this pod? No.
Terrible.
Okay, wrong. It's Monday. It's Monday. Sorry, that's my Thursday pod. The three Seaman Bros. Anyway, so we really do have to learn from like these types of experiences, because I do think that on certain teams and builds, I definitely hurt myself by not really seeing the full picture of certain player profiles, as well as just kind of like windows of when to acquire, when to get off of certain assets. But yeah, what about you, Billy?
No, that's a good one. I mean, it's so hard when there's a player who you don't believe in, and you, even if you can get like a good deal on them, sometimes you're like, I don't want to acquire this guy. And it's like that's something that we got to take ourselves out of sometimes. Like there was a trade I did recently where I acquired Quentin Johnson back, and it's like not something I typically go after, but the package deal made a lot of sense. And it's like, there is value in having him on your team. Somebody else will probably value him more than you at some point, and you can move him for that at the very least. Like those are real, those are real things. And it's hard, even with a guy like Xavier Worthy, who this isn't even like a great example of. I'm trying to think of a better one where somebody who's like really good who you didn't believe in, but similar example where it's like, he's even someone who's like hard probably to buy in for most of us, because obviously the price has gone up, but also you don't fully believe, it's like not a player that you believe in based on the tape, based on the whole package. And so like, I really feel that one in terms of, just how we navigate the market with that in mind. It's something that I run into a lot too. But for me, there's so much I feel like I could have done better this season. I've talked about quite a bit, I feel like, over the past couple of weeks, but one of them that sticks out to me just like on a more like player specific basis is like diving in so hard on Anthony Richardson when there was probably a lot more guaranteed type options, in drafts around the same cost, or even in trades around the same cost. And so I think it's something that, I like to, for quarterback, I don't think anybody does an extremely, quality job evaluating these guys, on a year-to-year basis. So I do like to believe, or like to lean into elite traits, which I do think Richardson possesses, but there's plenty of QBs with elite traits in a similar value range that you can go after instead. And I feel like it's just at that position, it's one where I think you should reach for the guaranteed asset, even if it means paying a little bit more than, going, especially on a volume basis, after a player like Anthony Richardson and putting, that many eggs in that basket. I just don't think that it was a good bet. And it's one that I'll definitely be more calculated about and think twice about going forward with similar players in the future. Another one that, I think something Jake pointed out that he had, or maybe I pointed this out, but something that Jake had been doing quite a lot this season was attacking those early season windows to sell rookies for more future capital, or just in general players for more future capital, but often it's rookies. And it's just something I didn't do enough this year, where I was a little bit too inactive. I think that early part of the season where everybody's trying to get their footing, and there is actually a lot of uncertainty that you can take advantage of, but it also, you can find yourself, I feel like, falling into, uncertainty yourself, where you're like, I don't know if I want to make any moves. I don't know if I want to do anything. And I do think that was a bit of where I found myself, but you should still try to look to the bottom of your roster, or look at anything that's gaining hype anywhere and look to sell that, because it does work. I saw it happen a lot this year. And then the last one for me was I too often took a deal that was sent to me instead of countering, in fear that the deal would die and I'd get nothing. And more often than not, I feel like people will go back to the original deal. You know what I mean? Like more often than not, people aren't just like, if you press them, they're not about to just like, all right, no, I mean, I will, but not that many people will do that. You know what I mean? Where it's like, they're just going to, stop communicating and not do a deal. So I think sometimes I put the way I interact on other people too much in those situations. And I don't think that I can negotiate. Like sometimes it's so close in my mind where it might not actually be in theirs. You know what I mean? And so I don't press it. And then I'll talk to you guys, or I'll talk to the Discord, and I'm like, what the fuck am I thinking? I could have easily done X, Y, and Z, you know? And so it's just one of those where I need to remember going into the offseason, because there's going to be plenty of negotiations happening that you can negotiate. And maybe it's in season, it hits a little different because you're trying to get things done for specific reasons, for specific weeks. And it's like, it feels a little bit more pressing, but even then, you know, you got to fight against that feeling, I think. So those were the things that, you know, looking back on the season, I felt like I could do a better job and need to try to do a better job heading into 2025.
That's really good stuff, man. All right. Dynasty Decompressed. So after tonight, unfortunately, we are at the post-point scoring season. It's all come to an end. It went by like that. We'll be begging for shitty games in about 3 months from now. Like, I'll just watch anything. So what just didn't make sense to you when thinking back on the year that you believe should change heading into 2025? Like player or team performing differently than expected, as an example. What you got, Jake?
Yeah, I guess like the big one, and I think it was something that I technically just couldn't really, I guess, garner going into the season, was just the general usage of the Green Bay Packers offense, and specifically Jordan Love and his productivity. I do think it was a pretty major regression from last year in terms of fantasy point scoring, and that's concerning. But I don't think it's going to be concerning long term. I just think it was concerning for this year. And the reason I bring that up is I think it was just one of those situations that none of us, maybe one of us, I feel like you're right. You were relatively more upper on Josh Jacobs than us, but regardless,
yeah, I mean, it was the amount of carries he had the season before was kind of what I believe
was the fear.
Yeah.
I think it applied some anxiety to just like the general hope for this move. And I think, you know, a very early week 1 injury to Jordan Love potentially changed the whole trajectory of that offense. And I just don't know if I can necessarily take anything away from what happened in Green Bay this season, except for the fact that I know, and we've now seen it enough, that Matt LaFleur will make any wide receiver, any tight end, any person really on that offense work. He made Malik Willis work. He made Jordan Love work. He made Emmanuel Wilson work. He made Chris Brooks work. He made Josh Jacobs work. He made basically Christian Watson work when he was healthy. Romeo Dobbs, maybe not Jaden Reed. That's probably the only person who hasn't really worked this year. And that's a very interesting one that I'll leave off for the time being. He made Dontavian Wicks work when he needed to. He made Malik Heath work, Bo Melton. The list goes on. And we're slowly getting into now Luke Musgrave. Now that he's back, he's finally getting usage again. Tucker Kraft works. And I guess I bring that all up to really hone in on the fact that like it's really hard to want to invest into offenses like this for so many reasons. But the biggest reason is because we're here to play a game that scores points, and scoring points then wins you money. And they're great for the NFL, right? Like they're an amazing pro football team. I just don't think that they are a team that I want to continue to try and invest in, to think about who that isolated player is that's going to break out. And so going in from the offseason, like I'm not necessarily upset with myself for, you know, devaluing Josh Jacobs or anything like that. But I do want to know, like, if there are ways that we can kind of pick up on these types of trends, think about more so the coaching trees now of how a LaFleur is going to impact the NFL moving forward, and how we're going to start seeing things like this now probably prosper across more teams. Because when coaches have success like this, it tends to kind of then stem. Yes, exactly. So that would be kind of one of my big takeaways. What about you, Uriah?
Well, I mean, now that you said all that, like, I totally agree with you. I mean, I know that Billy and I have been here last season, and I believe maybe even the season before, trying to figure out the Green Bay wide receiver situation. And we just have never been able to figure out, like, who is the wide receiver one. Well, there isn't one, right? And he told us that, you know, in press conferences to our faces, he said, I don't have one. I want all of them to have opportunity. So it's frustrating, and I believe you're right. I think it's one of those things where you just don't want to invest heavy into. But I will go to Houston. We seen last year this time in the offseason before the rookie drafts when people are looking for picks and players, and we see some trades for CJ Stroud. And they were not small trades. CJ Stroud was garnering a hefty value. And that's plummeted quite a bit this year. Whatever we call sophomore slump, whatever it has to be. Tank Dell coming back from injury, getting injured. Diggs not being healthy, Nico Collins missing time. Like there's all these things, but Joe Mixon obviously just having a career year seems like, or I don't even know if it's a career year, but damn, he did really, really well. I don't want to speak in absolute saying it was career year, but it looked like one of his best. And you just see there's no, in my mind, there's no like one reason why it's not working out. Like, why is CJ Stroud not making the throws that he was making last year? Why is this offense not supporting fantasy players the way it did last year with a rookie and a rookie head coach at the time? You would expect that to build on such a perfect freshman season from both head coach and the quarterback, that you would expect at least the same output that they had last year or something even better. And this year was just kind of disappointing. Disappointing if you were Tank Dell owner, disappointing if you were CJ Stroud owner, Diggs owner, Nico Collins owner. For the most part, except for when he was healthy, he was pretty good. But still, like the whole thing just does not make any sense to me. And it's one of those teams when I talk about, hey, we need to try to invest in teams that are up and coming. Like I talk about with Carolina. Again, I bring this up all the time. It's kind of like a broken record. I talk about it with Miami, which has not been the best this year, but I talk about it with Cincinnati. Whenever you get these young quarterbacks in there and you start to see the system change just a little bit, you want to get ahead of the deal. And my advice last year would have been like, hey, invest in Houston. Like there's nowhere to go but up. That didn't happen. And I have no idea why not. Hopefully we get a bounce back year from these guys next year, but I just don't know. I don't have the answers.
No. Those are two good ones. I mean, I think the offensive line was a problem there too, but for Stroud specifically, when you have all of your receivers injured periodically throughout the season, it's going to be tough to perform, I think, at a consistent and high level. But I also had on my list that Jordan Love's season is perplexing, and it may simply come down to the fact that he's not a running quarterback, and that almost like Josh Allen, it's not going to be one option that's the same from Sunday to the next. You know what I mean? It could be Tucker Kraft one week. It could be Jaden Reed 1 week. It could be Dobbs 1 week. It could be anybody. Obviously, Jacobs has been consistent, which is something that I didn't expect at the level he's been. I thought that he wouldn't have been as efficient, we should say. But for me, the one that I was looking at, just kind of thinking back on it, was how poor Dak's season was. And I think it goes back to kind of something that, if we're talking about the Green Bay Packers, it's a similar conversation in that it goes back to understanding poor offenses, poor offensive lines, poor offensive schemes, poor roster construction, right? And looking at it at face value and saying, yeah, that's not going to work. Like this isn't NFL caliber, top half of the league stuff. Like, and so you look back on it and you see what Jerry was putting together, what they didn't prioritize. And you see kind of over time, the line that we once knew is not what it once was. And this is what we get. Obviously injuries impacted things, but it was terrible when the guys were healthy, So just looking back on it, like I really didn't see this coming from Dak or just the entire Cowboys offense. I'm not sure that is going to get better there, but I do still believe in Dak, and I think he's much better than what we saw this year. So I think that'll change. Like it'll get right going forward. But man, if I couldn't see it this year, maybe I don't see it next year. You know what I mean? Maybe I'm not seeing it right now next year, but I'm certainly going to be much more cautious with the situation, especially if he's back in Dallas, which he should be. We have no word otherwise. So very concerning, and just did not see it coming.
Well, Dak will be back in Dallas.
Oh
He
yeah, I don't think.
Are you talking about
I don't think
McCarthy?
he'll be.
Yeah.
But it could. Who knows? You never know at this day and age. Guys could go anywhere if they want to reset. If they don't believe, especially with Jerry Jones, like anything could happen over there. But yes, you would like to see the coaching staff change and hope that
Yes.
gets everything right and they start maybe. Well, there's not going to be any GM change. So see, it's tough. It's tough. Like when the GM is locked in there for life and
Just
they're making
die,
poor
Jared.
decisions, like the roster can.
Die.
The roster construction doesn't get any better, but obviously we've seen even with poor roster construction, even poor scheme, these players do okay. So yeah, you'd hope they just get a new scheme in there and things get right. I'm expecting much better going forward, but just didn't see it coming.
I guess to this question, there's 3 teams that I'm interested in seeing what they do this offseason, and they're going to be kind of all over the spectrum. I guess 4. I'll start off at the very good to see like what they're going to do. That'd be the Minnesota Vikings. And given the season that Sam Darnold has had, it really does put into perspective, what a JJ McCarthy offense could look like. And by that, I don't mean that JJ McCarthy will have a better career or season than Sam Darnold. I just mean like, if we were able to see a revitalization of Sam Darnold, I do think that Kevin O'Connell can happily coach a young rookie quarterback who was also coached by Harbaugh for 3 seasons, right? So I'm relatively excited there and something that I want to look forward to, but I also am curious of where does Sam Darnold land? 1. 2 would be what happens with the Carolina Panthers, kind of extending from Uriah's conversation the last time that we met. I really do think that team is probably a few pieces away from being significantly more competitive as we saw later on in the season. I do think that their strength of schedule lightened up a little bit, so it made the team look a little bit better. But I do think that the pieces started really working really well with one another. Bryce Young really kind of stood into his own. Chuba Hubbard really defined a role for himself. And you even saw when you had a semi-competent wide receiver healthy again in Adam Thielen, that there's points to be scored there from a fantasy perspective. Secondly, I think the New York Giants have some really interesting pieces on their team. I know that could easily turn into pretty elite assets moving forward. If they do.
Homer take,
it's really not. I promise. I don't think that the team, when you see what they did actually in the offseason with their offensive line, outside of giving Evan Neal a starting job again at some point this season, making sure that there was, appropriate offensive line changes, right? I think they changed 3 out of the 5 starting linemen, which is insane. Andrew Thomas got injured by like week 5, and John Michael Schmitz at center, who's also relatively young and pretty mid, to be honest, is still relatively competent. I think with bringing in more competitive pieces and a legitimate quarterback, I think that offense actually turns into a relatively successful piece when you look at the individual pieces. And by those pieces, I mean Theo Johnson, Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Tyrone Tracy can all be fantasy viable. And I think majority of those pieces are pretty affordable, like not expensive outside of Malik Neighbors. So
legit quarterback is going to be the big question mark, though. I mean,
Drew Lock
obviously
season,
you're going to be Drew Lock season. You're going to be positioned to
EPA per play out of all the quarterbacks last week.
Yeah, he
last
did.
week.
By a mile.
I think it was the 29th ranked passing defense. But regardless, to your point, Billy, yeah, I don't disagree with you by any means. And I really don't think that the Giants' best move would be to draft a quarterback in this upcoming draft, even if they had the 101. So it really does put things into perspective. It really does. But I just think that from a fantasy perspective, if you can bring in even a middle tier quarterback like Kirk Cousins, whose contract will be, kind of
Justin Fields,
Justin Fields, there is space for those assets to have value. That's all I mean. I'm not saying that this team is going to be anything greater than probably 5-12. I just mean from a fantasy perspective, you'll get decent results. The last one, and I think probably the most obvious one, is going to be the Chicago Bears. Realistically, we all know what is wrong with that offense. I personally don't believe it's Caleb Williams. Personally, I think a lot of the statistics are borderline slander against Caleb Williams that are going online, specifically about his time to pressure stats, his QB rush rate, things like that. they really are dependent on the style of
Pressure to
quarterback that
sack
you have.
rate.
Pressure to sack rate. That's what it was. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Got you.
QB sack rate. Yeah. And so I think like we really need to kind of hone in on how quarterbacks kind of impact their own statistics. Like I do think that he is a quarterback who naturally is rolling out of the pocket more than any other. So technically he's not going to be, pressured as quickly as, let's say, a pocket present quarterback. That being said, you still have DJ Moore there, probably. I don't know. He did quit on like 2 games this year. And you do have Roma Dunze. Cole Kmet will still be there. The offensive line just needs to be revamped. So if they can do that, I do see that offense kind of turns into a significantly better piece. But I think it also goes to show that there were a lot of people, both in the media, online, that we're talking about how underdeveloped that offensive line was for a successful season, but we all kind of looked at the fact that they had, 4-5 key pieces on offense that looked pretty sexy. This is an NFL blitz, right? Like this is a game that you need to have a legitimate offense surrounding them. So
Great.
I think those types of things are kind of important when we start to expand upon where teams can be in 2025.
I'm telling you, understanding coaching scheme and offensive line play is stuff that is so important to the decision making that we are having to do in these rookie drafts and everything. Understanding, where these guys are headed to and the context of what they're heading into, because like we did look at that situation in Chicago and like great situation, and it's like skill players are great, but like if you can't stand in the pocket long enough to get the ball there, on time, in rhythm, it's not going to work. And I'm not nearly as confident as I was on Caleb coming in, but I do think that the numbers are actually like, I think outside of who he is and the expectations, you would take his name out of it, just put this on paper, you would say that this was a pretty good rookie season for a quarterback. That's all I'm saying. Uriah, I don't think agrees necessarily with the pass we're giving Caleb. But you got any thoughts on that?
I was trying to log in and say shout out to AJ for hanging out with us. But
shout out, buddy.
I don't have a YouTube account. Anyway, Caleb. It's just I get what Jake is saying about some of the stats that have been passed around. I think we've all seen it, the pressure to sack rate and others. I don't know. I mean, there's not a whole lot of games where I saw Caleb be like, oh shit, like, he's really confident, or like his wide receivers are dropping passes, or he's making the good decisions, but other people aren't doing their part. And honestly, what I saw out there was a rookie quarterback, but one that not very polished. There are some throws where you're like, well, there he is. That's the 101. But honestly, it looked like, it reminded me kind of like a rookie Sam Darnold. Which is fine, right? Sam Darnold, USC 101, really highly touted quarterback. But I think there's just a lot there. Like, I mean, I can't put all the blame on Caleb. It's easy to point out that Chicago has been perennially just terrible for quarterbacks. There hasn't been, Jay Cutler is the best quarterback they've ever had, right? That should tell you something. Unless there's ones that happened before I was born. So there is that, right? Like he said in the presser, he's like, fans have been upset and mad and frustrated since before I got drafted, which is kind of a shot at like, hey, how things are ran here, right? So I gave him a pass there. Like, I don't think he's in the best situation. He's in Chicago. But also at the same time, I'm not seeing him progress throughout the season, and I'm seeing him really struggle. Like, he's not able to do the things that was able for him to get by in college. He's not able to do those same things at the NFL level, and I think that's frustrating for him. If you've been a winner your entire career, right? The best, you're the fastest in track, you're the best, pitcher, you're the best shortstop, whatever. Throughout your entire career, you're just used to being the best on the field. He's not getting that, and I think that is affecting him, whether he wants to admit it or not. And maybe I'm not a psychologist here, but what I do see from him is like really no progress. 16, 17 games in, and he kind of looks the same that he did week 1. So that's my disagreement. That's all.
Yeah, that's completely fair. And the only thing that I'll slightly push back on, and I think a better comp to his rookie year in terms of performance, was what we saw out of the like 11 or 12 games from Josh Allen. I don't know if you remember his rookie year, but he just had he was just like incredibly indecisive, made just like a lot of physical plays, which I feel like is what Caleb is doing. He's just overly physical, which is funny because I still think that is probably Josh Allen to a T. He's like overly physical, but he kind of gets away with it because he has a bit more natural presence and probably God-given ability in that regard than Caleb does. He has a few inches on him, at least in the ones that we can see. And, I think that's... It didn't hit Billy. And so I feel like it's just like really...
AJ with the comment left behind. Thank you.
It's just, I think, kind of important to be patient with these guys because it did take Josh Allen to have an entire coaching revamp on offense to really start seeing success in year 2. And even year 2 was like
shaky,
kind of a slow roll if we want to be real with ourselves, right? But they did make significant changes to that offensive structure. They brought in, I believe it was Dable that year. I think Ken Dorsey came in either that season or the year after that as like a QB coach. It's just so much of what was going on in Chicago this year was bad. Like, let's just call a spade, right? The offensive coordinator hire in Shane Waldron was bad. Everyone knew it was bad. He was fucking terrible in Seattle. He was terrible in Chicago. No surprise. Guess what? His staff that he brought in was also bad. So it's like, who worked with Caleb for the rest of the season? Was Shane Waldron's staff. Like, it's just unfortunate, but I think that has so much to do with it. So it'll be really important. And I will say that I'm not going to acquire Caleb even at his lower cost right now until I see who the head coach is going to be, because I do think a bad head coach hire will only unfortunately hinder his performance. Because to your point, Uriah, and I completely agree, the comments about the general structure of the organization were pretty damning to the organization, but also a reality. I think that the pressure that goes on in Chicago is very similar to that in New York. People don't think of Chicago as big market, but it's a very big market team that has a significant amount of history behind it. And for this team to not perform for as long as it has without having like a legitimate quarterback, they had some great defenses in the 2000s. With like Brian Urlacher being like the main face of them under, who was that? Lovie Smith. Like, I think that's really kind of like where we need to have our understanding is like, what is going to be the new hub of this team, and can it kind of transcend where things are at? Like, I really wish if things worked themselves out in this, beautiful way, that like a Dave Canales would have had this opportunity to come into this team. Because I think he's the type of person I would feel really, really confident in working with Caleb Williams to get him where I needed to be. I think someone like even Ben Johnson, I don't see him leaving Detroit to go to Chicago, but like, the way that he's worked with Jared Goff and has been able to kind of set up that offense to be successful around Jared Goff has just been beautiful. That's the type of hire that needs to happen. And if it doesn't happen, I don't feel remotely excited about what will happen in the next 2 to 3 years with Caleb Williams. So I completely agree with you in so many ways. I just think that there's still enough within what I saw to be remotely excited, but I agree that there was nothing that was like ramping up towards the end of the season that I was like, damn, end of season Caleb was significantly better than week 1 Caleb. But I think when you put in all of the parameters, I think they make sense, unfortunately. And it just stinks of Shane Waldron everywhere.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Wow. That I did not think the Caleb debate would take us towards the end of the show here, but I'm going to mention one more before we just hit a few quick things and get out of here. You mentioned the Vikings, and this shouldn't take nearly as long. Maybe it will. We'll see. But I don't think there's going to be that many disagreements, but I've been very, very impressed with what I've seen from Jordan Addison. This kind of goes back to the conversation about a guy who, you weren't such a big fan of as a prospect, and hard to kind of get your head wrapped around, what they actually are. And what's funny is I was trying to think of like a way to get myself there. And I was like, wait, like Tank Dell, the reason I like him so much is he's an elite route runner, in my opinion, right? even though he's small. Well, Jordan Addison has kind of shown us that he's a near elite route runner, even though he's kind of small, and it's proven on tape all year long. I think he's showed some of it his rookie year as well, even though he was kind of a touchdown merchant. He was able to get open in his rookie season at a pretty high clip. When he's pressed, it's more difficult. But if he's not pressed, this dude is going to get open. He's just shown it, right? And so being next to Justin Jefferson, you know, we're like, it's not going to happen, but he's been really competitive from a fantasy perspective. And I think that he's kind of one of those forgotten wide receiver 2 guys. And I think it's going to continue into the offseason. And he's just a guy who, I don't know, I'm not super interested in not like going out there and buying him or anything like that. But like, I think that he's just an interesting fantasy asset, and he's better than we expected. And it's been a surprise seeing him play, play this well.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I left him for dead, so I was wrong.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think you made a lot of good points. And I think the weaknesses that you highlighted, specifically his inability to break off the press, is what's going to continue to hinder him and kind of leave him in that wide receiver 2, even wide receiver 3 range in a fantasy perspective. You know, he's going to sit in similar end of season statistics, probably around like a Devonta Smith. And those aren't bad numbers by any means. They're just like, you just need to understand, not us, but like, I just think we need to understand the general ceiling of his statistical success. And I'm still interested in him. I just don't know in what kind of builds I really like want him on, if that makes sense. Like the couple of shares that I had on him, I did this twice this year. I traded out of him into Brian Thomas Jr. was one, and then I traded out of him into AJ Brown in another. Like, I want to make sure that I'm getting elite points per game. And obviously AJ Brown's season, unfortunately, had its own issues, but like those would be like the types of receivers that I would rather have on my team, even if someone like Jordan Addison is being successful in the NFL.
All right. Let's move on. Question from Joe. Shout out Joe, Discord. Yenzer. Yenz. Finals exam stress. He's like, are you dealing with more stress regarding playoffs this year, or is it just me? I'll be very quick. Nope, no stress at all. I had one team make it to second week, and you know, I've been living stress free for a week now, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's stressful as hell, man. Like I think he put a comment in the Discord, like his wife found him like just huddled in the corner, like looking at his lineups. Like I'm looking at my lineups and there's no more setting I can do. There's nothing else I can do. Like it's just like what? Yeah, it's a stressful time, man. But like it was funny. I was talking to Jake and I was like, I think I'm going to lose most of these finals matchups. And he was like, yeah, like that, you know, it's kind of out of your control. And at some level it just is. And you got to kind of try to enjoy the end of the ride. And so I've been trying to turn the angst into enjoyment, you know, and be like, yeah, it's exciting. That's why you feel this way. So yeah, it's all psychological, I guess, at the end of the day is kind of where I'm getting at, but it is super stressful for sure. What about you, Jake?
Yeah, I would say that anxiety was at like a whole new level this year. And I think a lot of it was because I felt like, and this does happen, it feels like every year, but maybe it's just me getting older. Maybe it's me being in more leagues and feeling it across more avenues, when before it was like 2 leagues or 3 leagues. And now it's like, you know, this year I was only in 4 finals, but like, let me restate that. Like, I don't mean only, but I realized sounded, I'm sorry. You're right. That sounded awful to everybody. I didn't mean it like that. I just mean, I just meant like experiencing it felt more problematic because I feel like you couldn't handle like as much of the nuances between each team. And so like dealing with, you know, a last second, should I start Amir Abdullah over James Conner, right? Like those were the types of thoughts that I was having.
Yes.
And like,
I think that's what was stressful.
Should I have to be having that conversation with myself? And the answer was at the end of the day, yes. And I didn't make the right decision because I started James Conner. Or like, I think I posted in the Discord. It was like, should I be starting Hunter Henry versus the Chargers as a revenge game, or Kenny Pickett, a starting quarterback for the Eagles? And it's like, I went with Hunter Henry. And I was like, fuck, I clearly made the wrong decision. So, I think that was kind of how I kind of impacted a lot of that stress. And to Joe's point, it was also the fact that I had to make this decision basically Tuesday night. Like, these games were starting early morning for us on the West Coast, Wednesday morning on Christmas Day. And it was like, I'm relatively intoxicated on Christmas Eve, looking at these teams, thinking to myself, I probably shouldn't be looking at my team right now. Yeah, literally like one eye open. Yeah, trying to straighten out my phone, thinking I have it like tilted by the toilet. Like, what am
Joe's
I doing wrong?
Yeah. I think the timing of the games over the span of 5 days was nuts for sure. Yep. Needed to figure out who to start between Wednesday game and Sunday game is definitely tough.
He's absolutely right.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of people complaining about that and like, oh, we need to change like the playoff structures. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I think it's the nature of the beast at this point. I feel like championship weekend has always been hectic. Week 16 back in the day or whatever it was always just as terrible. Guys were sitting back then too. Yes. Guys have always been sat. Your star players get injured and sat. Like it's the nature of how it goes. But yeah, like
I think the worst part was red zone. The second half of red zone was 2 games.
Yeah,
what are they doing? I didn't even watch. I said I don't even care. Like this is
that was brutal.
It was brutal. Like, what are they doing?
And, yeah. No, it is a stressful weekend, and making all the decisions is so challenging. And I think that's what I was like going back and forth with. Also, I think I mentioned that to Jake in the same conversation. I was like, I should have started Josh Downs over James Conner, which would have been a terrible decision too. But it was just like, second guessing yourself constantly about the decisions you made. And it's like, man, we did the best we could. It's just, that's it. We did the best we could. So it's stressful, but it's fun, and just try to enjoy it.
All right, let's wrap up with some trades.
Let's do it.
All right, so this is a trade during the playoffs, and DU1. Oh, yes. This was actually final week. Yes, this was just this last week.
3 days ago. It was 3 days
so
ago.
We saw Brian Thomas Jr. and George Kittle get shipped over to the David Njoku and CeeDee Lamb team. I like the trade because I think in the Discord, some folks thought it was more of a loss than I thought. It was not that bad, considering Kittle's older than Njoku, and Njoku is fine. Brian Thomas Jr. obviously having a really good rookie year. CeeDee Lamb, I think it's more fair for me, but I understand like this is great because Njoku's out, Lamb is out, and those are things that you did not anticipate happening. And Njoku and Lamb help you get to the playoffs. So to trade for Kittle and Brian Thomas Jr., I think it was a good trade, and this is a reason why I think there should be trade deadlines.
Yeah, and what's even funnier, to go more to that point, why there should be trade deadlines, the person who traded, whether should not be trade deadlines.
I was going to end the pod right there, bud.
I know. I wasn't ready for you to tarnish our image like that.
The person who traded for the players who were playing the Brian Thomas Jr. and Kittle side is very likely to lose the matchup still.
Yes.
And so, buying a championship is not a real thing. I don't care what anybody says. It doesn't work that way. You can try to make your odds a bit better. You can refill spots that were, injured players that were not going to score at all. And that's a valiant effort, but you're not buying a championship. It's just not happening. And that said, though, I didn't even think that this is a really big loss, if a loss at all, necessarily for the Brian Thomas Jr. side. I saw this get done and I was like, it's a pretty solid trade. Like this is good. It's pretty fair. Obviously you're going to lean with the CD side, with the value coming from just that asset that is CD. But man, Brian Thomas Jr. working himself up there. I think Kittle clears Njoku pretty easily. And so it kind of makes me want that Brian Thomas Jr. side a little bit, to be honest with you. So I thought it was a pretty awesome trade for a contender in the fact that they're like going to lose maybe some short-term value, but not really lose that much value. I don't think at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm surprised that there wasn't more "quote unquote" tax on this, considering the circumstance. I think
absolutely.
The person acquiring Njoku and Lamb, I think I would have charged more personally. Like maybe not significantly more, but I think you probably could have gotten like a second on top of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's collusion. They're both Australian.
Yeah, they don't understand the U.S. dollar. It makes sense.
It was a good friend trade.
Hey, fair enough.
Nobody's walking away like a loser, right?
Exactly. No one is walking away from this trade as a loser. Nobody's hurt. It's more so just year. Like, it's the night before Christmas, but it's literally the night before Christmas, and you're like trying to make this trade happen. It's like, like, mate, that was my Australian non-accent, but mate, like, if you want this, if you want this trade to go through, like,
can't wait till he hears this.
You're gonna need to add a second, like something as stupid as that. I don't think it's significant, but it's something along those lines. This feels like a very fair trade on surface value, and more power to him for getting the trade done. But I kind of agree with Billy. Like, moving forward, I still kind of like the Brian Thomas Jr. and Kittle side, especially knowing that it was for the finals. I love it then. Sucks that it didn't work out, but happens.
Absolutely.
All right, another trade for the finals. Travis Kelce, Darnell Mooney at 25 fourth for the 26 first.
Yeah, I mean,
context here, the person who acquired the first was getting their first back.
Okay.
Oh, so it must have been a pretty high first.
Righting the wrong.
I think that Kelce got you what you expected or needed or wanted, but I just feel like it was a high price to pay.
Yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't have sent my 26 first for Kelce and some stuff. I'll just say that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the interesting thing is that they were sending the other person's first back to them, and that's why I think it's even more expensive to be you can control your own first, but like that person can't. So like I would be, kind of like, throw something else on top of it, and like maybe we can get a deal done here. But like, I'll be fine. Like I'll go to bat with whatever I've got. It got me here to the final. But yeah, this was a deal that I sent basically the day after I got eliminated from the semis, and was just like, hey dude, like I saw they were starting Amari Cooper, Khalil Shakir, and one other Buffalo Bills like receiver. I think it was Kincaid. And I was like, you don't want to start all three of those guys. Like you're not going to make, like, you're just not going to win your week. And I typically don't speak like that for trades, but I really wanted to get my first back. And he was like, I sent him, it was Kelce, Mooney, and that was it for my first. And he was like, like, I don't really think Kelce has that much left in his career, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, that's completely fair. But, what if you are the champion this year? Like, it will really help you out. Anyway, I left it. He came back to me. He's like, can you throw in a fourth? I was like, yeah, sure.
Yes.
I'll send it to you right now. But I intentionally waited like 30 minutes to not sound.
I do that too.
Super excited. I was like, holy shit, he's going to do it. So yeah, now I think I'm going to probably go all in on a tank on that team. But yeah, it's amazing. Like having that kind of virtue, or like being able to like see that future for yourself, is really nice, and having someone else hold on to is terrifying, because he could have easily charged me more. And I agree, I would have asked for probably a better asset on top of Kelce that I could have started. Probably would have asked for, like, I had Calvin Ridley. I would have preferred Ridley than Mooney personally. I think his upside with Mason Rudolph would have been better, and I think it actually would have been better seeing his actual game. So sometimes you win or you lose based off of age of a wide receiver or of a player, and that's what got that guy. But anyway,
all right, last one here. We got a postseason trade: Jake Ferguson, Fergie, for 2 late thirds and a late fourth.
Yeah, this is Ferguson easily for me. I don't really have too much to add on other than this is buying an asset very low.
Yeah, I talked about it already with Jake a little bit. It seemed like weird timing to do it, I guess. It's like, why are we trying to get Jake Ferguson the last week of the playoffs? I mean, maybe you couldn't have done this any other time, right? But I think you probably could have, because those picks are going to be more valuable in a month from now. I come up from a Cowboys homer perspective, and I have to point out that we've had Jake Ferguson's on our team since Witten's been gone. We had Dalton Schultz. They let him go. We had Blake Jarwin, who would have stuck around a little bit longer if he didn't get injured. And then we moved on to Jake Ferguson. When Jake Ferguson was out, Shoemaker was actually better than Ferguson. And to Billy's point, when he said, hey, it doesn't matter, Jake Ferguson has done enough that he doesn't have to be a Cowboy. He could go somewhere else. Sure. I think he could go somewhere else and be Dalton Schultz. And so that for me, it's not a very expensive price. We don't have to like talk about it a bunch. So it's not like a huge, like nobody's like, you're not losing a lot, right? Like you're not really giving up a whole shit ton to do it. But I think Jake Ferguson's days in Dallas are numbered. And I don't know that if he goes to a team that isn't perennially looking at their tight end as the number 2 option in the receiving game, like Dallas has been for a very, very long time, I worry that Jake Ferguson isn't going to be Jake Ferguson if he goes somewhere else. So it's just one of those things where I'm just like, I don't know. Like, could you have gotten a tight end similar that maybe is a little more stable than what I foresee with Jake Ferguson's future? But it's no sweat off anybody's back. It's a very cheap price to pay. So hopefully it works out. Hopefully he gets a contract.
Yeah, those are fair concerns. I do think that like Dalton Schultz is probably worth that price even generally. But yeah, I mean, I think he's young enough and I do think he's shown enough still, but those are good. Those are fair points for sure.
And the only other thing that I'll add to it, because I do agree with you, Uriah, is that he is going into his 4th year. So like for me personally, acquiring him at this low, knowing that Dak will be back next year, unless like Billy said, something crazy can happen, I guess, with contracts, NFL, blah, blah, blah. I don't actually believe that. I think Dak will be back next year. I think the offense will just probably be better as a whole. I don't think Jerry is going to, even in his senile state, accept the fact that they were so bad this season. That being said, contract years typically work out pretty well for most players in the NFL. They tend to overperform in those years. Dalton Schultz did it as well in Dallas, which got him a relatively decent contract in Houston. I'm not acquiring Jake Ferguson here for him to be my dynasty tight end. I'm acquiring Jake Ferguson here because he cost me 2 late thirds and a late 4th. And I want to flip that into hopefully a late 1st, because I do think that there is going to be a window next season when, you know, God forbid, like CD goes down and Ferguson lands with like I said, God forbid, 4 straight weeks at like 20 plus points, which is very viable in tight end premium. I could probably get off of him at a significantly better rate than what I acquired him for. But I agree, he is not an asset that I want to be building my tight end room around or anything like that. It just was one of those where, and to your point, why now, right? Like, I do agree that I'm probably selling picks at a relatively inaffordable price, but I also do think that one, this league in particular is not particularly well versed in the game itself. I don't think that they're going to invest or divest a lot of time to properly educating themselves about rookie profiles. And so who am I actually going to be interacting with at the end of the late 3rd and late 4th? I'm going to be interacting with the 2 of you, maybe a couple of other folks that we know. And realistically, I don't think I'd be able to get an asset like a Jake Ferguson for that same price at that point in time. And I don't really know what I'm going to get with those picks either, unless there's like significant value fall. The other thing I will say is that in this upcoming draft, to the antithesis of what you said was one of your things to learn, I have too many draft picks on this team. And I think I have like 9 in this upcoming draft or 8. And so it felt good to get off of some, especially because I just won the toilet bowl, which got me the 213 or the 301, however you want to see it. And I figured I'm actually, in my mind, that pick, I would probably trade up from the end of the 2nd round, the end of the 3rd round with those 2 thirds to get up into that pick anyway. So I felt like I was adding an asset kind of for free, and then just getting Jake Ferguson kind of on top was kind of how I saw it from like a a roster building perspective. Now, by all means, this can all go and blow up in my face and things could obviously happen. I'm completely conscientious of that. I just thought for acquisition costs, it made sense. But I think your narrative that you brought around just kind of the general tight end usage and where it's kind of gone wrong for tight ends in Dallas is 100% on the money. And I really do appreciate your perspective there.
Good. I like it. I like it.
As you should.
Yeah, no. I mean, both points. Like, I mean, what you're saying there, just by you could. I mean, there's no reason to be drafting 9+ rookies, right? So to consolidate those into actual NFL players, like I understand that. I didn't really think about the plethora of picks that you had in that league. Makes a little more sense to me now. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about before we get out of here?
No, we hit it on the money tonight. Hope everybody gets the Monday Night Miracles that they need and head into the off season right. But appreciate everybody here. Hop into the Discord if you aren't there already. And take it easy. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year,
championships, boys.
Yeah.
Later.
Later, y'all. Be easy.